Welcome everyone to today's live webcast, a masterclass on sales coaching. I'm Nick Stein from Salesforce, and I'm coming to you live today from our studio in San Francisco. We have an amazing show planned for you today, featuring some incredible speakers. Here at Salesforce, we are a publicly traded company, and so I just want to share with you quickly our safe harbor statement. Essentially what it says is that you may see some forward-looking statements here today. And so just remember that this is written in PowerPoint and not in stone. Let me now, without further ado, introduce our speakers here today. First of all, we have Tony Robbins, who over the last 35 years has had the unique opportunity to work with more than 4 million people from more than 100 countries around the world. His journey began with the desire to help individuals transform the quality of their lives. But most recently, he's been able to specialize in transforming key impact areas for businesses worldwide. And we're incredibly honored to have him here today. Tony's got a long and valued relationship with Salesforce. And our CEO, Mark Benioff, has actually said Tony and his strategies and tools have been at the core of our culture from the beginning, and has been one of the critical keys to us at Salesforce developing our leadership position in cloud coaching and growing into a $3 billion business. So, Tony, very happy to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to introduce Walter Rogers, who's the CEO of two global sales performance management consulting firms, Cloud Coaching International and Baker Communications. And he's created and led businesses in 13 countries on 3 continents and has been interviewed by just about every major news organization out there. Walter's passion for CRM enabled sales performance transformation, has inspired him to write 2 books, and we're going to be focusing a little bit on one of them today, Pathways to Growth, which he co-wrote with his partner at Cloud Coaching International, Tony Robbins. Walter, very happy to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, I'd like to introduce our third speaker today, Barry Traylor, who's managing partner and co-founder of CSO Insights, which is a B2B sales effectiveness research and benchmarking firm. Barry's a contributor to both Harvard Business Review and CRM Magazine, and he surveys thousands of companies every year on sales performance, lead management, sales compensation, and performance management. For those of you out there, just to let you know, Barry has written a white paper that goes into detail about these findings that CSO has around sales coaching and process. And we're going to be making that available to everyone today. In fact, you can probably find the link on our social stream, and we'll also be sending it out to all the attendees as well. And the title of the white paper talks about a concept called 2 millimeters. And this is where I want to bring Tony in, because I know, Tony, that this idea of a 2 millimeter shift is something you're really passionate about and something you've spent a lot of time looking at. Can you share with our viewers a little bit more about this 2 millimeter concept and what it means?
Well, sure. First of all, thank you for having me on. For those who tuned in, let's cut to the chase, right? It's the most competitive world we could possibly be in, we think. The reality is storms are coming. If you're out there and you're paying attention, you know this world economy is in an interesting place. Companies since 2008 have been brilliant. The ones that have succeeded, they've done the smart thing. They figured out how to cut, they figured out how to become more efficient. And we've seen some of these companies now have larger, cash balances than they've ever had. They've made the companies more profitable than any time in history. But some of those companies now are starting to struggle, and they're struggling with how do we increase that top line, which almost everybody here, whether you're a sales leader or you're a sales professional, you're looking to figure out, what do I do to increase those sales? How do I move that top line? And it's not quite as simple in the world we're in today. And the competitiveness is going to increase. Let's face it. Right now, the Fed has done a $1 trillion party this year. $1 trillion. That's $85 billion a month that they flooded into the economy. And it doesn't just come to the US, it goes around the world. It goes to China. I tell you this because I'm not to scare you, but you and I, if we're going to be honest, we got to see things as they are, and it's going to get much more competitive out there. So now, just a little bit of a difference. You don't have to re-engineer your entire sales process. You need that little tiny edge. You go to the Olympics, I work with a lot of Olympic athletes, and we'll work for 6 months on how to make a difference of 0.2 of a second. A guy can win the gold medal by 1/100th of a second. What do we give the second person? The silver, the third person, bronze. The fourth person, who's a second later, 2 millimeters behind, we give nothing, and the fourth fastest human being on earth. So my view is this: look, if we're going to be effective, there's two things. There's the things that are going to create breakthroughs that are exciting, and then there's those little disciplines that we all know but we don't do enough of. I can't tell you how often I see people who are good people, good salespeople, good sales managers, sales leaders, regional leaders, and they're doing the right thing at the wrong time. And that's what causes people to fail. They do the right thing at the wrong time. You buy a house in 2006, buying a home was great, you bought it at the wrong time. So sequence. The dog bit Johnny, Johnny bit the dog. Same content, different sequence, different experience of your Johnny. So my passion is saying, look, don't fall into the trap of thinking that you know everything in this industry, you've been around forever, because then you lose your edge. Hunger is what gives you that edge. And knowledge is not power, it's potential power. I've seen so many people who make the mistake to think that knowledge is the same as mastery. We all know that isn't true. Execution will trump knowledge any day. So one of the things that Walter and I have done is go around to companies and see companies that are having this explosive growth. And as you said, Mark Benioff's a dear friend of mine. I've been with him since the very first days. He went to one of my seminars. He left Oracle, started Salesforce with the idea of building a $100 million company, which this year you guys are going to do about $4 billion. So I've watched that journey. The companies that have grown, who can grow that top line as well, they've figured out a set of strategies on how to just execute. And Walter's going to talk a little more detail about it, but it's really fundamental. It's not rocket science. It's just these little tweaks. I went and took up golf. I'll never forget. And you can tell by the way I speak, it's probably not the game for me. But two of my sons started playing golf. And I swore I'd never play golf because I don't need another reason to use an F word. And I also don't want to dress like that. But golf places are the prettiest places in the world. Golf clubs are. And I want to be with my boys. So I took up golf. So my first day out, boom, I hit this thing. Probably within the first 30 minutes, I outdrove my instructor who'd been playing the game for 20 years. So, of course, I'm a guy. So I bust his balls, and I tell every person he knows I drove the ball further than he did on my first day playing the game, not realizing that paybacks are a bitch. So the next day he takes me out. And, I'm great on a driving range. I'm on a real golf course. He starts me out at a golf course where it's a very, very tight green to start with. And just before he starts, he gets me all revved up. Can you hit it further than you have before? And most of you play golf know hitting it harder is not better. And so I hit the ball like a mile, but I hit the ball 200 yards to the left. And I'm so frustrated because the day before I was relatively straight. And so now I try to crack. I'm going 250 yards to the right. And I'm like, give me another one, give me another one. People are waiting behind us. They're getting upset. They want to lead people through. But I tell you the story because in the end, he finally says, ain't it a bitch? Welcome to golf. I said, it's not golf, it's me. I said, this is insane. I'm 200 yards off. And he said something I never forgot. He said, Tony, actually, you're 2 millimeters off. He said, you're overcorrecting. That's what most people do in their business. They overcorrect. Don't get me wrong. There are times to revolutionize, and there's times to figure out that if you're going to hit that golf ball, if you hit it dead solid straight, you're straight. But if you're just 2 millimeters off, just 2 millimeters this direction, you're 200 yards off here. 200 meters off here, you're going to be in the water or the sand. And so we've been focused on what are those little 2 millimeter execution points that if you'll do them, you'll change the whole game. That's what this is really all about. And I say that to you because when you start feeling like, oh my God, I'm so far off, I can never make that sale. When I tell people victory is near, it's just a strategy away. It's just a tune-up away. It's just a measurement away. And that may sound like positive thinking, but we've done it again and again. We were just with Mike Clayville from over at VMware. He was sharing with Walter and I how he took the strategies we put here. It sounds so simple, so basic, but he implemented them and he went from 500 million to 2 billion in sales and 8 consecutive quarters of growth using exactly what we're going to show you here. So let me throw the ball back to you and Walter.
Well, thanks very much, Tony. That's very inspirational, and it makes us feel like we can all go out there and make that 2 millimeter shift. But the question is, of course, how do you do it? And we're lucky enough to have Walter Rogers here, whose mission in life is to work with organizations to help them do just that. So Walter, Let me start off. You've written a book with Tony called Pathways to Growth, and in it you talk about these 9 disciplines that can really make the difference when it comes to sales performance. We're going to focus on a few of those today, the ones that are specifically focused around the conversations that a sales manager has with their rep. And you have a pretty interesting take on this, that it's not just about a single one-on-one. It's about having different types of one-on-ones based on the situation you're in. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. One of the most exciting moments in a chief revenue officer's life is to be able to tell the CFO that he's going to miss the forecast. And they will do anything to avoid that. And so as a result, there's always a hyper focus on the number. What are we going to close this week? What are we going to close this month? And there's a really predictable cadence that unfolds inside of a company around the forecasting process. The problem with that is that you can't manage the result. What you can manage is the set of steps you go through in order to create a result. And managers, for the most part, are pretty efficient at having these forecast meetings. They have group sessions, they bring their teams together, and they talk about whatever number that's going to be closed for the month. But when it comes to really being effective in their one-on-one conversations with the reps, sometimes those things just tend to slip by because they're caught up in the pressure of the day, the 300 emails that they got that day, all the bombardment of information that's coming at you from Twitter and Facebook and every single device that people carry. So what we have found by studying literally hundreds of companies, hundreds of organizations, is that there are little tiny 2-millimeter shifts that organizations can take to create much more predictability in the forecast and create a much better predictability around the amount of pipeline that you need in order to meet future forecasts. And it's such a simple concept. And I'll break it down into 4 particular disciplines. It's the idea of having a pipeline one-on-one meeting, a forecast one-on-one meeting, a master one-on-one sales meeting, and then coaching in the moment, ride-alongs and call-alongs, which are the sets of meetings that happen between a manager and rep when they go on sales calls. Now, the idea is this, that instead of bringing together your teams and investing 10 hours of people time on one team call to review numbers, is to actually save all that time and invest it much more wisely in these series of one-on-ones. Let me just break down how this happens, and I'll talk about 2 of the disciplines first, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Nick. So the idea between the forecast and the pipeline is that the forecast is what most people focus on because it's the pressure of the day. It's what most companies measure success by inside of this specific quarter or month, whatever their reporting period is. And so as a result, there's a tremendous amount of emphasis placed on that. And it typically revolves around deals that are late stage 3, 4, 5, whatever your sales process is, with a close date inside of their reporting period. And the managers will spend a ton of time on that. And they never really get around to talking about the pipeline because the urgency of the moment takes over. So this 2-millimeter shift that we have found is actually separating those 2 conversations into 2 separate meetings, and rather than holding them in a group setting, holding them in one-on-one sessions. The outcome of doing this is quite remarkable, actually. Tony just talked about one of our clients, Mike, and the results that he produced in moving from $500 million to $2 billion over 8 quarters. The other great piece of information about that is many of his managers were producing that by only having a 2 to 3 to 4% forecast variance as they went through that process because they were executing in this specific way. And so you separate the forecast conversation from the pipeline conversation. The pipeline conversation then is the part that people never get to, which is what's going to happen in the future, what's going to happen next quarter, what's going to happen with the deals that you have that are maybe at stage 1 or stage 2, or heck, they might even be at stage 0. You haven't even started working the deal yet. And by having the manager focus on the rep and forcing that conversation to occur so that the rep comes prepared to these meetings with a predefined list of targets that are part of the future, with a predefined list of opportunities that they're going to be working on in the future, and by asking questions around what are the specific concrete steps and behaviors that that rep is going to take in order to advance an opportunity from an early stage 1 to 2 to 3, then creates much more sufficiency in the pipeline, better hygiene in the pipeline, and ultimately better results.
Great. Well, I'd like to take a moment to ask Barry. I mean, you study a lot of organizations as well. Do you want to jump in here and offer your insights on this topic?
Sure. Well, we have done some research on that, and Walter's absolutely right. The focus is on the number, and what are we currently closing? How are we doing? And the notion that you don't manage results, you monitor results. By the time you know what the results are, they're history. and then you get to the next quarter and you're behind the power curve. We looked at, we actually asked a couple of questions around pipeline in our SMO this year that were pretty interesting. One was, there's this sort of traditional rule of thumb that you should have 4 times quota in your pipeline. That way you probably have a pretty good chance of making the number. And so we asked, what is the expectation in your company, multiples of quota, 1, 2, 3, beyond 5, and so on, and what's actual? And what was interesting is that there was a much closer congruence between expected and actual in, again, these firms that have a coaching culture and have process in place versus those that do not. And I mean a significant difference. These folks were maybe 2.5 and we're looking at 2.3 times actual, and the others were 2.5 to 3.0 and they were maybe 1.8 actual. I mean a big difference.
Can I jump in? Can I jump on this?
Yeah, please do.
Barry, we were together just recently in London with Vodafone and Dell and a whole group of companies there. And Barry, what I found interesting is some of the research you've done. You and I talked about this, and I talked about it with those CEOs. Is that what's interesting is the reason you want to do these one-on-ones, besides you can actually be more impactful. You and I both know if the numbers are wrong, you're screwed. I mean, it's the nature of salespeople to be optimistic. Even if you're a salesperson watching right now, it's your nature. But the only way you really get results is you figure out what the real gap is between where you are and where you want to be, and then you get deadly serious and you call it tight so you can figure a strategy on how to close that gap and how to make the reality happen. But the numbers in some of the most successful companies in the world are pretty crazy. Barry, if my memory is correct, if you go to play craps, isn't the number your advantage, 49%? Is that right, or 48%? What was it?
It was funny. I had a slide. I showed the pass line on a craps game, 48.6%. On a 00 roulette, 47.5%. And across all the companies we surveyed, forecast accuracy. And what's dramatic about this is not pipeline, this is forecast. Right. Forecast opportunities, 46.5. So
you have a better chance of winning in craps than you do getting from your own people what's really real. And so that's why this discipline is so important, because when you get with somebody one-on-one and you're, even if it's here on Skype, you're looking in their eyes, you're feeling what's going on, you're able to ask specific questions as opposed to the group think. You can figure out what reality is. And if you're a leader, even if you're the individual, you're a salesperson having this done with you, you're going to come to Jesus much quicker. You're going to find what really is necessary. Well, most of us in life, we don't want to hear the bad news. But if you've been in business long enough, if someone says to you, I got good news and bad news, which one do you want to know? I always say, tell me the bad news. The good news will take care of itself. Tell me the bad news so we can rip it open. Putting that aside is why people go through that experience that all sales leaders love so much, of missing, your numbers. I mean, you and I both know that's not something everybody wants to go through. And it happens because of these little disciplines that, by the way, before we in the virtual world, people used to be in proximity. We saw everybody every Monday morning, and you were able to have these one-on-one conversations, to look somebody in the eye and do the training and test people. Then everybody 20 years ago got shipped off and virtualized. Wonderful idea, but email wasn't doing it. The technology didn't match. Now we have the technology. I mean, Salesforce is delivering it, Work.com, all these killer tools, but we've lost some of the fundamental disciplines that are so basic that we've forgotten to apply them. And listen, if you look at somebody like, I got to interview, some of the greatest coaches in history. You think about UCLA, and you see a team that won 11 consecutive national 88 games and 11 out of 12 NCAA championships. I mean, that wasn't luck. They had a coach, he was extraordinary, and his mindset was, I don't care if you can make a shot over your back arm from 20 feet away. Come over here and make these free throws, and I want you to come over and make these bank shots from 5 feet away. I want to see 100 in a row. What we're about is, let's figure out how do we get you to do the little things that are going to take all the stress out of your life, the little things that allow you to really know what's necessary and produce the results right now. That's what these 9 disciplines are really about.
I just would like to add one thing, and that is, obviously Tony's very inspiring, and the data supports the messaging here. But, the other thing that you get from Walter and Pathways to Growth are prescriptive answers. And it's not just that managers aren't asking their folks, questions, but you have to be asking the right questions.
That's correct.
Tony's been all about that all along. How do you ask better questions? too often the question is, what's it going to take to close the deal? And, where are we here? I mean, it's not useful. You're asking questions, you've got FaceTime, but it's just not focused, it's just not helpful.
And it's the key. It's those questions that really give you insight into what's really happening in the deal flow. So it's things like, I see that you have this deal at the 4th stage in the sales cycle. By this point, we should have had a CIO letter sponsored and endorsed and read it around for approval. Has that actually happened? And if you don't ask that question, you don't really know as a manager, is this a real deal? Is it really at stage 4? Nor do you know how to coach to that, right? Because if it hasn't happened, then, my gosh, what do we have to do in order to get that CIO on board, to write that letter, to write it around, so we get everybody else involved in the conversation? And it's difficult to do that in a team setting. That's the importance of the one-on-ones.
Well, and the other
especially a virtual team setting.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm just going to jump in here and say is, key to what you just said is not just what are you doing as a seller to advance the sale, what is the buyer doing to advance the sale? Because that really tells you what progress you're making.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Now, you make a really great point about how a small difference of separating, what you're doing today, the pipeline, with what you're looking at doing tomorrow, the forecast. But when you're talking about meeting one-on-one, you have a concept in Pathways to Growth called the master one-on-one. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think that gets into what we're really here for today, which is, how do you figure out how to ask those questions? Assuming, Tony, to your point, that the numbers are right and that you've got a dashboard that's telling you this is what's happening. These are the areas where this particular rep needs to work on. How do you sort of determine what those areas are and then have a meaningful, impactful conversation with them, a coaching conversation that can actually get them to make that shift that we're all talking about?
Well, the first step is to make sure that you're even engaging in that dialogue on a regular basis, and it's focused on the right sets of questions, and that the information is being captured inside of Salesforce.com so that you're coaching against specific gaps and specific opportunities. But a lot about this has to do with what Tony likes to talk about, which is strategy, story, and state. And Tony, I'd like to turn it over to you and share your perspective on that.
I think it starts really by thinking about every person as an individual. The great part of these one-on-ones is they can make up for a lot of meetings that you're wasting time in, because you have somebody right in front of you, and everyone's style and approach is different. So I always say, to influence somebody, you have to know what already influences them. Most of us are really good at influencing people who are like us, but if you've got a large sales staff and over a large region of the country or the world, you have to be able to enter each of their worlds. And you have to understand who you're dealing with. And the purpose of this really one-on-one master sales meeting is to not just figure out where are they really in their pipeline, their forecast, the individual deals. It's also, what are their goals? What are they trying to achieve? If you can help them achieve what they want, you know darn well you're going to be able to achieve what the organization wants. But too often that coaching process is missing for people. And I think that if you want to help somebody create a breakthrough, let's assume you've got somebody that's having a challenge or doing well, you want to take them to another level. I can tell you, look for 3 areas just really fast. And I don't care, a breakthrough, just so you know, I define a breakthrough as a moment in time where the impossible suddenly becomes possible, where you go from talking about stuff to doing it, where you go from, I'd really like to do this, to where it just becomes the habit and you follow through. And what changes people's results, that moment, can come from a lot of places. It can come from being pissed off. It can come from being frustrated. It can come from being inspired. It can come because someone shared a new insight with you. But I found 3 things in particular that we might want to throw up on the screen. I'll give them in reverse order. You want to change your results as a leader and get a breakthrough with your team. You want to get a breakthrough with somebody one-on-one individually. One thing that can do it is simply a new strategy. So often we keep doing what doesn't work. But strategies, as you know, are often a breakthrough. Do the right thing in the right way. I remember I did a talk here for all of Salesforce's salespeople, about 3,000 people a few years here. And there was a lot of discussion about technique and a lot of discussion about the advantages of Salesforce. And they were all brilliant discussions. But when I got up, I said, I'd really like to challenge something. I'd like to challenge the presupposition that you all seem to have, that these are the things that are going to make somebody buy. Because I've spent my time with 50 million people from 100 countries. And I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, everybody has different goals and desires, but we have certain needs. They're the same for everybody. They're the same 6 needs. We need certainty. All of your people that you're working with, they want to have certainty this is going to be worth it. Where's the ROI in this? How am I going to know that there's going to be real value in here? We also need uncertainty. If we're bored silly, if we don't have enough variety, we need to feel significant. We need to feel that we're special, unique, important in some way, to ourselves and other people. We need to feel a sense of connection to someone or to a people or to a team or love. We need to grow, we need to contribute. Real quick, those are 6 needs I can tell you everybody has. But not everybody's equal. If you're working with a salesperson, you want to inspire them and motivate them. You think selling them on the next thing economically for them is going to do it. Very often they are coin operated, but not always. And even those that are, there's another level. If you're trying to close a deal, you've got to know what's going to influence this person. So I had Mark and 3,000 of his people. I taught them these 6 needs. I taught them to identify them. And I said, I want you to write down an example where you closed an incredible deal. And how many of these needs did you meet? And how much was that person driven? Because of the 6 needs, some people are more certainty driven. That's the most important thing in their life. Some people are more significance. What am I getting out of this? How are you treating me? You don't treat me well, it doesn't matter how much money you save me. Some people are more, they're going to buy based on relationship. No one is the same. And none of the salespeople you manage are the clients that you go to. So I did an analysis. I said, you do the analysis, 2 deals. A deal you lost, and then I want you to describe which of these 6 needs did you fail to meet or did you successfully meet? And a deal that was a breakthrough that you won. What came out of it is Mark and the top salesperson, all Salesforce, who got up that day, and the largest check in the history of the company for any salesperson, I've forgotten the size, was sizable. He shared that they had worked on a project together where they had failed, and where they failed is they assumed, I know what this person wants. We're going to show them that our product has the most endorsements and it's going to be the best economically for them, which makes common sense. But I had a conversation with the President of the United States not long ago, and I was describing him. I said, your plan is common sense. Everything makes sense, but I said cognitively. But humans don't operate that way. You can't tell people you're wrong, and then expect they're going to suddenly support you. I don't care who you are, President of the United States. And so in the case where they had failed, they had met the guy's needs for certainty about the value of the product, but they didn't make this guy feel significant enough to say yes. He felt like he was just one of many. And he went with somebody else with an inferior product that simply they had a better strategy. They knew how to meet his needs better. So that's number 1 real fast. Number 2, if you got a great strategy, let's say you want to lose weight, you want to do anything, lots of strategies help you lose weight. People don't usually use their strategy. If your salesperson is not breaking through, if you're not breaking through, you probably have a limited story. Think about it. How difficult is it to be fit and strong? Content's everywhere. It's cheap. You can download it. Someone can show up at your house. We're not fat in this country. We're not, a third of this country is obese. Not because it's so hard to understand the strategy. It's because what keeps us from using our strategy is a story. If your salesperson's not succeeding, you got to listen for that story. The story might be, everybody's tightening right now. The story is the competition's got a better product. The story is there's too much politics going on. Everybody's got a story, and those stories keep us from making progress. So we have a set of tools to show you how to break people out of their story in a way that's very respectful and where you can do it for yourself. It's an ability to get rid of the stuff that's keeping you from making progress. Somebody says, I can't lose weight. Why? Here's their story. I've tried everything. Or, something like, I'm big boned. No, you're freaking fat. The truth will set you free. But as long as you have a story, I don't have the time, whatever the story is, you are handcuffed. You cannot use the strategies. And finally, if you try to change someone's story without changing their state, the state we're in, the mental, emotional state, that place of, for example, when you're really angry at somebody, have you ever been really pissed off with someone? And then suddenly you can remember everything they've ever done that pissed you off. Or you're totally in love. You're head over heels in love. You're in lust. You can't stop thinking about this person. What's wrong with your life when you're totally in love? Nothing. Because our state affects our story. Our story of what life's about, how the business is, where we're going. And our story controls what we do and how much of our strategy we'll use or come up with. So if you just think of 3 areas to intercede in those one-on-one meetings, can I change their strategy? Can I help them shift their story? And can I change their state? And before you get with them one-on-one, got to take a look at your own. What's my strategy for influencing this person? Am I doing what works for me versus what works for them? Do I have the story that I can handle these objections myself inside my own gut? And am I in state to make a difference? Those 3 I found, you can change those 3 and you can see an immediate change in any individual or group of people.
Well, that's an amazing sort of encapsulation of when you get, because I think so many times people get into the room as a sales manager with someone on their team, and there's kind of an awkward pause and they don't really know what to say. And by giving structure to those conversations, you're immediately going to make them more impactful. But I think there's one more piece of this when it comes to the one-on-one. And that, Walter, you talk about the ride-along or the call-along, which is really this notion that You can help someone in the room when you're talking to them, but then there's what's going to happen when they're actually on the job, when they're selling. Are there ways that you can provide them with impactful, meaningful feedback right in the moment that can lead to that almost instantaneous change in state, in story, in strategy? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is maybe one of the most important things that a manager can do. Our strategy, story, and state really all come together. It's at that moment in time before a sales rep is going to be face-to-face, mano-a-mano with a customer or a prospect, trying to create value for that customer and prospect. And unfortunately, in so many cases, people just tend to wing it. You know, they'll show up, they'll go to a sales call, they kind of remember their notes from the previous call, they get in the meeting, they wing their way through the meeting, and then they leave, and that's kind of the end of it. If the manager's there, sometimes the manager takes over the call, the rep doesn't really gain a lot of benefit. Now, Barry and I were talking before the show that, you know, there's no such thing as really as luck. Sometimes people get lucky. You can win the lottery, of course. But in most cases, luck is really the intersection between preparation and execution. It's those two things. And as a manager, that manager's role before a sales call is to get that strategy figured out with that rep. Number one, what is the strategy? What did we do before this meeting? What outcomes did you already achieve? What were you supposed to have done for that customer? What was that customer supposed to have done for you? What are the questions you're going to ask? What are the specific goals and outcomes you have of this meeting? And what is our agenda? How are we going to go through it? And then they need to help control their story, right? What's the story in your head before you go into this customer? Well, they might be thinking this customer's a jerk and he's really difficult to work with. So you got to get that under control. And then you get them into state so that when they enter that meeting, they enter that meeting with confidence and certainty that they're going to be able to produce the outcome that they're after, which is a specific flow through of the agenda. Now, after that meeting, after that sales call, what's the manager supposed to do? Obviously, he's supposed to debrief with that rep specifically around the outcomes. Here was the game plan that we had put in place. How did we execute against that game plan? And what are some small little tuning corrections that we can make before we go into our next call? And it's that three-step process: preparation, the actual meeting itself, and debrief after the fact that can produce incredible results. In fact, we were working with one of our own clients, large chemical distributor, followed this process, the specific ride-along, call-along process. They increased the value and close rate of their opportunities that were in this specific process by 114%. That's real math. Those are big numbers that can produce real impact and results.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, we have sort of a special treat today. We've got some folks who have asked questions of our panelists today, and we've got them live on a Google Hangout. So I'd like to go over to one of them to ask a question to someone on the panel.
Hi, Tony. This has been really, really, really good content. And I guess my question is, what's the best way to measure, the success of a sales coaching program that I would implement in my organization?
Well, I think every organization has their own way of measuring. I think the obvious one is the sales results. I mean, it's not hard to see where somebody is, but I think you want to measure more than just the results. You want to see what happens to the pipeline. You want to see each stage of it. I think as a sales manager and leader, there's a new tool that actually we're creating at Cloud Coaching International. We're just doing it for some pharmaceutical companies. But one of the challenges I found of the salespeople that work for us in our various companies is, I don't know if do you have any athletic background yourself? Did you play sports at all in college or high school?
Yeah. Okay. I played baseball.
Great. So how often did you practice?
Almost every day.
That's right. You practice with your team. And if you're really good at a sport, I don't care who you are. All of my clients, all the way back to the early days of a guy like Michael Jordan, these are guys that are the best in the world. They practice with their team, and then because they're the best, they go practice some more. Now, when do most of our salespeople practice? And who do they practice on? Our clients. Because in the old days, we were in proximity. You had that practice. You push them. So my way of measuring that I'm now implementing in our organization is we have 15 minutes. Like, could you imagine a guy in baseball going out there and say, I don't need any batting practice. Let's just start the game, right? Taking no ground balls, no pop flies, nothing. You look at him like he's an idiot. Well, what we're creating now, and we've just got it up and running, as I said, is a way for 15 minutes a day for your salespeople to be measured. And the measurement is practice. You get them to whatever device they use, an iPad, iPhone, whatever device they have. They immediately get a message. They got to respond to it. It's the objections, the most important objections that, let's say, show up in your field. They have to text in or type in the answer. They get a phone call later asking the same objection. They got to answer it verbally right then and there on the spot. Well, you say, well, that's wonderful, Tony, because we actually know what people are actually saying, not just measuring whether or not they happen to be in a great region and their sales are going well. I can really begin to see what this guy does, how he deals with things under pressure in real time. I can hear it. But more, I manage a lot of people. That's a lot of time. Well, everything we have is automated so that part of that 15-minute practice is three things. They get a question, they answer it. So you know what they're really saying. Text, you can read it quick. They get the question verbally, they respond to it. You get to hear the influence and the way they communicate and their voice and tone and tempo, the way in which their inflection and so forth. You get to see how they really deal with the pressure. But also the third thing you have to do is they have to tweak or give feedback to somebody else's answer. So it allows you to get the feedback of all the other team members there. And what that allows you to see is not just, is he selling more, but hey, if someone is even practicing 15 minutes a day, you know a lot about the salesperson. You can intervene early on. If they're practicing and they're saying the wrong things, isn't that nice to know now versus just seeing where their sales really are? In addition to that, you get to see, are these people learning? And the best answer is navigate up. In addition to that, if you're ever going to need to replace yourself because you're going to move higher in the organization, it's hard to bring somebody in and go through the process of getting them, onboarded. Wouldn't it be nice to know which your salespeople are not just the salespeople, but have both the skill, the intelligence, the compassion, and the emotion to move up into sales management, because you'll see who the best people are within their group. So to answer your question, I'd measure by sales, I'd measure by pipeline, and most importantly, I'd have a way to daily measure people, because we all know you can only manage what you measure. If you don't measure it enough, it's not there. When I take over a company, the way I grow companies is I start measuring massively. I find out the major key elements, and we measure more often. If you measure once a month, you're going to have bad months. Once a week, you're going to have bad weeks. Once a day, your worst you're going to have is a bad day. There's some things we'll measure hourly in the beginning until we get that momentum. Measure more, capture it, and you'll be able to intervene sooner and get a better result.
Can I do that?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
So
You're welcome.
There's another aspect that's really important, which is, are your best sellers staying in your company, or are they leaving? Right, as Tony mentioned in the video, 70% of the time when a rep leaves an organization is because they have a poor relationship with their manager. So look at your retention rate. Are your best sellers, are they staying, are they leaving? And are they bringing in other best sellers with them? Are they recruiting their friends? Because people that are of high caliber hang out with other people that are of high caliber normally. So how many are staying versus leaving? How many are coming in?
Barry, do you want to add to that too, in the research that you've done? Are there specific measurements that you find particularly impactful?
Well, there are. I was going to jump in, so thanks for asking. Yeah, we've defined 3 performance levels. I mentioned the SRP matrix. Folks can read about that in the white paper. But in answer to Bob's question, the 4 that we use to rate levels of performance are the percentage of revenue plan attained, what is target revenue, percentage of reps meeting or beating quota. I mentioned the significant difference earlier. Forecast accuracy. What's the outcome of deals that are forecast to be won? That is, won, lost to the competition, or no decision. And I'll just say here, just parenthetically, the biggest winner in the last few years has been no decision. Extraordinary number of deals go to no decision. And the 4th one is this notion of total rep turnover. Those are the 4 that we measure all the time. In the white paper, some of these things that Tony and Walter have both been talking about in terms of things you do during the process, the ability to differentiate our offer from the competition, the ability for reps for managers to proactively identify which reps need additional coaching and so on. There are, 8 or 9 in the paper. The coaching culture with process implementation, minimum 6 times more effective.
Wow. Well, that leads in nice. So we've got a few minutes left today, and I want to make sure I give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about how people can take what they're learning today, the inspiring words from Tony, the real detailed analysis from Barry, and some of the specific coaching tips from Walter, and actually put it into practice in your organization today. So I'm just going to give you guys a brief overview right now of what we do at Salesforce. And essentially, it comes down to something very specific that we've learned, which is, we've got in our among all of our customers here at Salesforce, we've done a lot of different analysis of how they do. And it turns out that the customers that we have who are on the Sales Cloud, our CRM application, it comes back to that measurement piece, see an immediate 32% improvement in sales productivity. Phenomenal, right? But then there are those customers out there, maybe it's just a 2 millimeter difference, but they are seeing a 50% improvement. And so here at Salesforce, we were trying to figure out what is it that makes the difference. And it turns out that there are very specific behaviors around coaching, some of the things we've talked about today, that make the biggest difference in those organizations that achieve amazing results. And we call them sales performance management behaviors. If you look at the way Gartner describes sales performance management, it's improving the sales organization by providing guidance, motivation, information, and assistance to sales teams. Exactly what we've all been talking about here today. And the challenge is, and I mean Tony and Walter spoke about this stuff is not easy. It's difficult. Identifying the issues and then figuring out ways to really impact them takes time and effort and real initiative and focus. And it turns out that when we look at our research, only 15% of managers are spending enough time coaching, only 10% enough time motivating, and only 5% driving that accountability to the numbers that Tony was talking about. And as Walter mentioned before, what happens in these situations? 70% of reps end up leaving. And so what we've done here at Salesforce is that we've combined Sales Cloud with Work.com in one application, on one platform, to create what we think is a way to consistently ramp up the types of coaching conversations, the types of behaviors around providing alignment for your organization, providing motivation in real time, and providing that feedback, that consistent feedback, and a way to coach your people, all within the place where you are measuring and tracking your sales results, the Sales Cloud. And we feel like this is really a way for you to take some of these inspirational words from Tony about how to really ramp up your sales performance and how to take that and actually implement it in a way in your organization that's scalable. And I know, Walter, you wanted to talk for a moment about the work that you've been doing with Pathways to Growth as well, and then we're going to get to some Q&A as well.
Terrific. Yeah, so look, last year, Tony and I launched Pathways to Growth at Dreamforce, which was an amazing event. And the feedback on the book was really positive. They said you've got 9 really interesting disciplines, they're really common sense. They were laid out in the book in a way that was very prescriptive. It would tell you how to do it, what to do, give you some tools, etc. But it was a book. It was a printed document. And the world today, people want access to information anywhere, anytime, on any device, whether it's an iPhone, an iPad, a Droid device, their PC, their Mac, who knows, right? Any kind of device. And so they challenged us. They said, can you take all this great content and make it available in a way where a manager can use it right before they go into a meeting, right? Or right before they go into a one-on-one with a rep, or right before they go into a coaching session. And can you fill it with videos from Tony and customers? And can you put in there the hows and the whats and the whys and some specific tools that you can use to actually manage the agendas in these meetings so that you make sure that the meetings are on target, on focus, and produce the outcomes that they want. And so here today, we're actually announcing that that product is available online. You just go to our website, cloudcoachinginternational.com. There's a link. It says free preview, and you can create your own account, and it gives you access to all of the content through the first discipline in an interactive format. So we're excited for you to check it out.
Now, Tony, just before we go to some questions that have been coming in on the social stream, I just want to get your perspective as someone who is a longtime user of Salesforce, is using Work.com, and obviously putting your stamp on the Pathways to Growth product as well. How do these things all come together in order in your organization to create some of that leverage and some of that consistent performance that we've all been talking about today?
Well, like you described in your statistics, I think those numbers are almost identical to what we experienced initially. We saw about a third growth in our sales. Mark's been a friend for some time, and we still weren't using Salesforce for a while. And we finally brought Salesforce on, and it was fantastic. But what I found was maximization didn't happen until we started addressing the people side. It's like once you have the system, that's phenomenal. But now you need a process for maximizing that system, and you need the people to have that psychology shifted. And so I did some work on that, but that's part of how Walter and I became partners because, we've been doing business together for about 15 years. But I finally sat down with him and I said, we really need to take this and maximize it because it's horrible to have 30% growth when you have 130% growth. And so that became our focus. And then when Work.com came on, I find that to be invaluable for peer-to-peer type of communication. Instead of everybody trying to acknowledge from the top down, when it's done laterally, when it's even done from the bottom up, it's extraordinary. And, not only the acknowledgement that comes from people sharing stories about what's going on or being able to communicate or share projects in an intelligent way, but also, we have prizes and we have economics where we allow a certain amount of people's bonuses to be given by anyone in the company. So you can decide you have so much money each quarter, you can distribute that. You can distribute it and it's converted into Apple products or it's converted into Amazon products for someone. They can purchase whatever they want. And we just found it to be a fun part of our culture now where people are acknowledging people in a different way, where people are being more conscious about holding people to a different standard. And it isn't just happening from the top down, but it's happening side to side, peer to peer, and from the bottom up as well. So we find these tools to be incredible. But one of the reasons that Walter and I decided to write this book was because Walter was practicing some of this. We were practicing some of this. And we said, let's codify this into 9 disciplines. And now, we've been taking companies like Dell. We've increased one division, one group of theirs by over 600%. In fact, they thought the number was so ridiculous that Walter can share with you. They did a focus group with us. And they said, okay, we're going to do a non-group of cloud coaching people, and we're going to do a group of cloud coaching. And the results were pretty extraordinary. Walter, will you share them the numbers?
Yeah, you bet. So in that particular control group, our teams produced 26% more pipeline, 119% more wins, and 19% fewer losses. And it was really because of that structure, accountability, and cadence that was put in place between the manager and the teams.
That's great.
Oh, but now let me say this. None of that would have been possible without Salesforce.com. None of it, because it was the measurement instrument that allowed the manager to determine what was really happening and how to guide themselves through that process. Would not have been possible.
And you don't have to think, right? The system reminds you what to do at the right time. Yeah. And all we're doing now is we're enhancing it with these 9 disciplines so it's built into the system for the companies that participate with us.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, guys. Well, we have another question from the live participants on our Google Hangout.
Hi, Tony. It's a real thrill to meet you. My name is Maria Ignatova. And I just wanted to ask you, all you said has been great, but I'm wondering, what is the difference between coaching and micromanaging?
It's a great question. I think what's the difference depends on where a person is in their development. When a person is brand new, they're an enthusiastic beginner, you do need to micromanage them because you have to teach them everything. At the very beginning, your style has to be very directive. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go here, make a left here, make a right there, open the cupboard, bring this thing back to me. That's not micromanaging when someone's in the first stage of development. Then after a while, people go to a second stage of psychological development, which my friend Ken Blanchard used to call the disillusioned learner. And that's where, you still need to direct people, but they don't want to be directed, right? So you do because they don't quite have it yet. They know enough, but not enough to actually have the habits to make them successful. So now you have to not just be highly directive, but as Ken would say, you got to be highly supportive. You got to say, listen, I know it's a tough situation for you right now. I don't want to be micromanaging you. That's not my intent. But I want to make you succeed. And there's a couple of things that still you may know intellectually, but they're not in your body yet. And I'd like to give you this feedback, okay? And you enroll them. There's a third stage where the person, they know what to do, but, Ken and I talked about, he called it a reluctant contributor. They know what to do, and they know how to do it. They got the skill, they got the ability, but they're lacking the confidence because they're kind of new at it, right? It's kind of like, did you see Karate Kid?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, it may not work on you. For those watching, there's a stage in this movie where, the master comes and teaches the kid, just wash the car. And the kid takes it for a long time. And one day he's a disillusioned learner. He comes to him and he says, what am I doing? I'm wasting my time. I'm washing your car. I'm washing your floors. And Yagi tries to throw a strike at him and goes, huh? And the guy washes his hand away. He does this move. Well, there's a later stage in the movie where the kid is skilled. He's like the salespeople you're dealing with. He's really skilled. He doesn't need micromanagement. If you micromanage him, it's going to piss him off, but he still needs support. That third stage person just needs your emotional support, your psychological support, saying, listen, I know you can do this. Let me help you with this just a little bit. And you're not going so much in the details now. Now you're really doing the psychology side. And then finally, there's a fourth level, which is the super achiever, the person that's integrated, the person who's competent, is effective. That person needs very little direction. You give them too much, you're going to be micromanaging. And they need very little support. They're like, don't give me, I kick ass on my own. I don't need to do that. Just give me what I need. So what's micromanaging and what's coaching depends on the stage of development of the person that you're working with. Is that helpful?
That was great. Thank you, Tony.
You're welcome.
That's a great point. I mean, I think that sometimes we hear from our customers that one of their biggest issues is they try and take the same approach with everyone on the team. But of course, we all know you've got 5% or so of top performers over here. Then you've got a whole range of people in the middle, and then you've got some poor performers over there. And I think it's that one-on-one consistent coaching that we've been talking about today that allows you to bring a unique approach to each individual, as opposed to just trying to put a stamp, the same approach with everyone in your organization. Would you guys agree?
Nick, it means...
I'd like to add something to what Tony just said, and that is when you have these really experienced rainmakers, skilled, competent. Tony, I'm going to suggest that those people still need coaching, still deserve coaching, and too often managers just sort of stand back and say, I get them whatever they need, but otherwise I just stay out of their way. And in my view, that's just benign neglect. That they deserve it and require it as much as the others, but in a different way.
I was going to say, Nick, I think even those people that are competent in certain areas, right? And they don't want that coaching in that area, but there's weaknesses. Because you're really a brilliant person doesn't mean you're brilliant at this particular skill set. Or because you've been a rainmaker in one area doesn't mean you're a rainmaker in another. And so one of the things to do though is, you've got to make sure that here's the psychology. If you're a sales leader, you got to be a practical psychologist. You've got to be able to be in a position where you get someone to want your coaching. To do that, you got to make sure they feel like they're growing towards something. And when they get there, they're going to need less of you. Less of you does not mean you don't coach them. That's what Barry is saying. You're still coaching them, but it's done in a way where they feel like, oh, I want that. You helped me to get here. Oh, I wouldn't mind getting to the next level. But they have to have an ownership of what they do master if you're going to really be effective with people. And that's why what we've been talking about here, these 9 disciplines, they go every month or every 90 days, depending upon which company and how you structure what you do, but you never miss. It becomes a system. And so people no longer feel like, what are you doing coaching me? It's just our normal meeting. This is how it works.
The way we do
so you don't have
business
people
around
being offended in any way. And also you don't miss because it's part of your system every single time. And that consistency is where the execution comes from. And execution, as I said earlier, always triumphs over knowledge.
That's great. And not only that, these high performers, right, that oftentimes they just let them do whatever it is that they want to do. These can be the guys can inspire the rest of your team, right? And there's a whole other discipline that we're not covering today called the learning huddle. But you leverage these people because the peers around them, they like to learn from them. You don't leave them alone. You use them to inject energy into your company.
Figuring out what are those winning behaviors and then broadcasting them internally so that other folks can really learn and absorb them and put them into action. Now, we've had an amazing amount of activity on our Twitter stream. I want to just shoot over to my colleague Maura to get a question for the group here. Maura?
Thanks, Nick. So like you said, I've been monitoring the Radian 6 engagement console throughout the webcast, and the social conversations definitely buzzing. So if you guys have a question that you want us to answer, use the Ask the Experts hashtag on Twitter. Let's get to our first question from Ivan Gomez. What are best coaching practices for remote team members?
Well, thanks for that question. I'm going to ask you, Walter, to take that first.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the reality of the situation is that many of us work from remote locations. I mean, we've all been dispersed to work out of our homes. Sales offices began to shut down in the kind of early 90s, and technology really wasn't able to connect us in ways that were meaningful back then, right? It was spreadsheets, and it was baud line, 9800 baud and AOL and all of that stuff that really didn't work. Today, that's not the reality, right? The reality today is that technology can literally connect us in incredibly meaningful ways. products like work.com, which allow public goal sharing. I can publish my goals. Well, you want to make sure somebody achieves their goals. One thing you can do is make sure they make everybody else aware of what those goals are, because then the team can help keep them accountable. So that's a huge part of it. The second part of it is using some sort of collaboration technology that allows a visual component to a coaching conversation between a manager and a rep, right? And the third piece, Barry, I'm sure you've got things you want to add to this, is that you've got to be consistent. You cannot be inconsistent about it. If you schedule a one-on-one session or a team session with your team, what's the worst thing you can do is cancel that session. Get in a pattern of rescheduling sessions. Then all of a sudden, nobody believes it's going to happen. Nobody's going to be prepared. They may not even show up because they don't think you're going to be there. So pick a technology that allows you to stay connected, leverage a system that's predictable, that gives a schedule, and then stick to it. Barry, was there anything you wanted to jump?
Consistency is, that was the thing I was going to add, is consistency. And one of the things, you've talked about work.com, salesforce.com. It's also incumbent on the managers to show up for these meetings. And, when they're doing pipeline review, to sit down and say, what have you got for me? It's like, what does it say we've got for you? I mean, I put this stuff in. So everybody using the system, user adoption is always a big issue. We look at both the rep adoption, but also sales manager. If the sales managers aren't doing it, let me tell you, the reps are not. So that's where the leverage is. And the consistency, and you'll get pushback. I mean, they're testing. Do you want to do this meeting, or do you want me to go close this deal? Yeah. It's like, yeah, we've all heard that. They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and then consistency across an organization as to how coaching unfolds, because the reality also is that companies restructure and reorganize at an incredible pace today. Mm-hmm. So just because you're on one team today, it does not mean you're going to be on that team tomorrow. And the experience that we've seen is that as reps move from team to team, they have to relearn a whole new coaching language, a whole new system by which they manage their business. And so creating a level of consistency, not just inside a team, but across an organization, has a huge impact as well. Sure.
I also think, you got to remember that you get what you tolerate. We get what we tolerate in ourselves and the people around us. And as you were just saying earlier there, Barry, people test you all the time. If you develop a relationship that's respectful and where you really are truly trying to help this person who's virtual to achieve their goals, and you know something about them, you're not just calling every time, what are your numbers? But sometimes you surprise them, you check in on them, or you find something they've done well and you sincerely reach out to compliment them, even though you're busy as hell. Even though these people supposedly don't need this, everybody appreciates when they're not just a piece of a cog in a machine. When people feel like you really give a shit, when people feel like you're reaching out and doing more for them than what you're just asking from them, they're going to show up at a different level for you. So it's about reciprocation. It's about saying, what can I do to anticipate? What can I do to help? What can I do to reach out? All it takes is a few little moments where you step in and acknowledge or offer something where you're not making a demand, you're not making an expectation, even though you have the right to, since you're the sales manager. That deepens a relationship. And now when it's time to cash an emotional check of demand, your relationship is not going to bounce, if you will, metaphorically. I also think the other thing is that's why things like our pepper product is so valuable, where every single day, sometime during the day, there is a measurement of their current competencies. Because if you don't do that, you're going to be measuring sales, you're going to be measuring pipeline, but you have no idea what these people are actually saying, how they're dealing with things. And to test that regularly, just to keep, just like the athlete who gets up there and practices and takes batting practice every day and doesn't practice on the game, you don't want them practicing on your clients. So another thing I would definitely say is something you want to consider for your organization.
So I'm going to go back to your example of the big deal that Salesforce won and the one that they lost. And the one that they won, they understood what the person wanted in terms of significance or recognition or whatever. In the book we did back in 2003, Jim and I did together, we interviewed a guy named Gary Lutz with Wells Fargo. And one of the things, we're suggesting that they need to know those needs about their buyers. He was saying he wanted to know those needs about his reps.
Yes.
So really know that individual, not just, as you said, Tony, just talking about, what have you got for me? What's it going to take to close this deal? Where do we stand? But how are you doing with that, whatever issue that we've been working on? And let's get caught up on that. And really, when you say being respectful and demonstrating that you actually care about this as an individual, not as a unit of quota, but as a real individual that's part of a team, that's part of something else. It's one of the great lines is, we work for the money, but we live for the strokes. And that's what really engages people, when people feel like they're really a part of something.
And sometimes the word strokes has a negative connotation for some people, other people really positive. But what we all want is to know that we matter. We all want to know that we mean something to someone. And I think some people in that group are going to be more committed to certainty. If you can increase their sense of certainty that they're going to achieve what they want, they're going to be more effective. Some of those people need variety. If you're calling them all the time with the same crap, they're just bored silly with you. Yep. And you're not going to get much support or respect beyond what they have to. If that person needs significance, which most people enter this profession want to be significant, then you got to give them sincere significance, not bullshit, not blowing smoke, not pumping them up. What can you really acknowledge them for sincerely, where they see and feel like they're unique and they're appreciated? Some people, it's all about personal relationship. It's that personal connection. You know those things about what's going on in their life. Some people, man, it's about growing. If you can help me grow, you're king in my life. Some people, it's like they want to sense that what they're doing is meaningful, they're contributing. Finding out people's hot buttons and meeting those buttons becomes even more important when somebody is virtual than when they're around you. Because when you're around you, there's more proximity. And with proximity, you pick those things up. When you're not in proximity and you're using tools of efficiency like the phone or texting or email, boy, all the more reason you really got to hone in and know what the needs are of that individual.
Well, and of course, the other thing about this is people then are learning by example. So, it's easier for them to do it with customers because they're experiencing it themselves or watching it happen.
It's totally true, Barry.
Now, I'd like to go back over to Maura for another question that someone's sent in on Ask the Experts.
Okay, thanks, Nick. So the next question comes from Angela Oberlin. She's asking you guys, what should I do if my management won't look at the bad news or talk about gaps?
Well, thanks for the question, Angela. Tony, do you want to start off taking this one with, if the manager doesn't really want to get into some of the issues of real improvement that need to go on?
Yeah, here's what I'd say. And I'm coming from a different place than a lot of people do because I chose to work for myself and all the companies I've been part of. I have partners in many of them, but I believe that the truth serves. And I believe that instead of saying we live in a culture where no one will listen to the truth, they won't look at those gaps, I'd say it's on to you personally to break through. I mean, you get what you tolerate, as I said earlier. And I think it's really critical to say you are the creator of culture. Instead of saying I live in a culture, if you're a leader, you're the creator of the culture. And you get that culture by what you tolerate. So I'd come to them and say, listen, I understand it may be inconvenient right now. I understand there's a lot of stresses right now, but this has got to be dealt with. And if you bring your voice to the table consistently, it will get dealt with. If you can't get anybody to do that after all that, my guess is you're going to be one of the 70% that leaves because you're not aligned with your manager, and you're going to find another opportunity with somebody who is more driven based on the truth than where you are. My hope is that you get through to them. But most people you can get through if you're truly committed. Why we don't get through is we're trying to kind of share something where we're trying to be safe. I'd say strap on whatever guts you got inside yourself, step up and tell the truth, and the best will come of that one way or another. And if this organization can't handle it, I can promise you there's an organization out there that's, if you're hungry enough to see things aren't working, to speak up and to do something about it, there's a place for you somewhere else. There's a culture for you you'll be more aligned with.
Point, Tony. I mean, one of the other things that I would say to that is it goes back to that point you guys were making earlier about consistency. If someone's only hearing negative feedback once a year during a performance review, it's going to be really, really hard to have that conversation. But if you're meeting on a weekly basis with the people on your team and you're setting the stage for a very meaningful relationship where you talk about things that are going well and recognizing that, and also talk about things that aren't going so well, when you do have to have those tough conversations, we find talking to our customers that they're a lot easier to have because the person knows that you're not just parachuting in once a year as their manager slapping them on the wrist. You actually really care about their self-improvement and their progress in their career.
Yeah, and on top of that, we all have such a tendency to try to communicate electronically, and certainly there's the moments in time where that's appropriate, but that is not when it's appropriate. You do not want to communicate difficult information via text, email, preferably it's a face-to-face conversation.
So true.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing you mentioned, the annual review, I mean, that's not going to change anything. For feedback to be meaningful, there are 5 measures, and I won't run through them all, but the first one is it's got to be timely. Yeah. And if people are getting feedback, semi-annually or annually, it's not going to happen. The other thing I'll just mention with respect to the question, of the 9 disciplines, 4 are about managing and coaching the individual. 4 have to do with managing, coaching the team. The 9th one has to do with managing up to leadership. And the same expectations that you're setting with your reps and with your team members and how you're measuring, it's the same thing you're going to be doing, talking to your manager at the beginning of the quarter, at the beginning of the half, right. At the end of the year. Here are the things I'm measuring. And I think one of the things, part of it is having the courage to actually step up, but in addition to that is also having the clarity and getting agreement at the beginning. Here's what we're up to.
Exactly. Getting alignment around what's really important, what the focus is, what you're going to be measured on is so important. I think we have time for one more question. So I'd like to turn back over to Maura. What else do you have for us, Maura?
Okay, Nick, so our next question comes from Justine, and she's asking, what is the best way for a new manager to begin to build trust with their new direct reports?
I think personally,
thanks
if
for the
I
question.
I think the most important thing you do as a leader, don't think of yourself as a manager. A manager is someone who will get results as long as they're right there engaged with people. A leader can lift somebody's own standards to the point that when you're not around, they continue those standards. And in the world of virtualization, see yourself as a sales leader, not a manager. That'd be the first place. And then if you are a leader, go first. Anything I want somebody else to do, I do it first. I do it at a harder level than I didn't expect anybody else. If you ever went to an event that I do, I just got back from London. We have 6,000 people there from 19 different countries, translated 9 languages simultaneously. The seminar is 50 hours, 50, in 4 days. Now, most people won't sit for a 3-hour movie that someone is, spent $300 million to make. So how do you engage people? I go there first. I go to a level of intensity and a level of commitment and a level of caring and an energy level that I can now take somebody else to because I've done it. I remember a gentleman who's now a dear friend of mine, actually a dear friend and an associate of mine, partner in another business. He came to an event one time and he's, sitting back with his arms crossed. He said, I saw you up there, Tony. And he said, it was amazing. The air conditioning went out in this building and it was hot and I was wearing a suit and tie. And he said, you were giving everything. And I was sitting there thinking, why do I got to do this? And the sweat was going down my tie, I guess. I got about halfway and he said, if that guy can do this, I can get up and rock and roll and make this thing happen. And you turn the corner. Leaders go first. Do some things for them. Don't just ask them. Go figure out everything you can about their needs, their desires, and their goals, and try to think of what are some of the ways that you can start to demonstrate with real action that you're in the game with their best interests in mind, not just you're in the game to be a voice of the company, and you'll build a different level of relationship from day one.
The other thing, too, is do what you say you're going to do when you said you were going to do it. And if you can't, let them know in advance before you miss the deadline. Because the fastest way to lose trust with people is to start dropping off on the commitments you've made to them.
Well, and I mentioned earlier, people learn by example. My number one secret answer for that would be, as a new manager, who's your coach? We're talking about coaching the folks on your team, but my question always is, who's coaching the coach? Well, this is great. I really appreciate you trying to up my performance. Let me ask you, who are you working with? What are you working on this quarter? And having every manager having their own coach is a very powerful statement.
Same principle. You're showing that you're doing first what you're asking them to do. You'll be able to lead. Can't lead someone. You can't, touch somebody if you're not touched. You can't move people if you're not moved. And you can't lead somebody and coach somebody if you're not really being coached and taking it in yourself.
Well, this has been fantastic. I'd like to thank all of the guests who joined us today. Tony Robbins, thank you again for being here with us. Walter Rogers, Barry Traylor. It's been a very fascinating discussion. Just a reminder, the recording of this will be available, and we will do our best to answer all the questions that have come in. Unfortunately, we haven't had time to get to most of them or many of them, but we will after the broadcast. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Take care, everybody. See you at Cloud Coaching International.